These empty walls, it had become a routine, really. Her brief appearances at home, followed by long stretches of absence. I tried to tell myself that her ambition was admirable, but the truth was, it left me feeling like a ghost in my own home. Marissa's son, Samuel, had recently moved back in after finishing college. At 21, he was polite, respectful, and surprisingly helpful around the house. He carried himself with a quiet confidence I found both endearing and intriguing. His presence was a welcome change in the monotony. But over time, I began to notice things. Fleeting glances. Lingering smiles. The way his hand would gently brush against mine in the hallway. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination. After all, he was my stepson, and I was a married man. That afternoon, sunlight streamed through the blinds, casting streaks of gold across the room. I'd finished my chores and decided to change into something more comfortable. Peeling off my shirt, I stood before the full-length mirror, studying my reflection. My undershirt clung to my torso, and for a fleeting moment, I wondered, did I still look desirable? It had been so long since I felt truly seen by Marissa. Her attention was always elsewhere, her phone, her friends, endless projects that always took priority. I reached for a lightweight robe draped over a chair. The cool fabric brushed my fingers as I pulled my undershirt over my head. The sudden creak of the door startled me. My heart leapt, and I instinctively clutched the robe to my chest, spinning around. There, standing in the doorway, was Samuel. His eyes widened in surprise, his expression shifting from shock to something deeper. Something I couldn't quite name. "Oh my God. I'm so sorry," he stammered, taking a step back. "I didn't know you were, I thought you were downstairs." The silence that followed was deafening. My pulse thundered in my ears as I struggled to find my voice. It's fine," I managed, though my cheeks burned. "I didn't hear you come in." He hesitated, his gaze flicking between my face and the robe held tightly in my hands. "I didn't mean to interrupt," he said, his voice soft but strained. "I'll go." But before he could leave, I blurted out, "Wait." The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken tension. He paused, turning back to face me. "Yeah?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I hesitated, my mind racing. I didn't know why I'd stopped him. Maybe it was the loneliness clawing at my chest, or the way his presence filled the room with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. "It's okay," I said, my voice steadier now. "You don't have to leave. I was just caught off guard." He nodded slowly, stepping back into the room. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." "You didn't," I replied, though my heart was still racing. "I just wasn't expecting anyone." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us felt charged, thick with intention that was both exhilarating and terrifying. I could feel his gaze lingering on me, and despite my embarrassment, I couldn't bring myself to look away. "You're sure you're okay?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "Yes," I said quickly, forcing a nervous laugh. "It's not a big deal." But it was a big deal. The way he was looking at me, the way my skin tingled under his gaze, it was unlike anything I'd experienced before. Time seemed to slow, and the only thing that mattered was the space between us. "I should probably go," he said again, though he made no move to leave. "You don't have to," I said, surprising myself with the words. "It's nice to have company." His expression softened, the corners of his mouth lifting into a small, gentle smile. "Okay," he said simply, leaning against the doorframe. "If you're sure." I nodded, my grip on the robe loosening slightly. "I'm sure." For the next few moments, we stood there in silence, the weight of the unspoken stretching between us. A rush of heat flooded my cheeks as his eyes met mine. Steady and unflinching. There was something in his gaze, something that made my breath catch and my heart pound against my ribs. "Daniel," he said softly, his voice breaking the silence. "You've been different lately. Are you okay?" The question caught me off guard, and I hesitated before answering. I'm fine, I said, though the words felt hollow. Just tired, I guess. You don't have to pretend, he said, his tone gentle but firm. I can tell something's been bothering you. His sincerity disarmed me, and for a moment, I felt the walls I'd built around myself begin to crumble. It's nothing, I said finally, though my voice wavered. Just life. He took a step closer, his gaze never leaving mine. You don't have to go through it alone, you know, he said softly. I'm here. The vulnerability in his words washed over me, and I felt a lump form in my throat. Thank you, I whispered. He nodded, his eyes searching mine. Any time. I watched him linger in the doorway, his hand brushing against the frame as if he were reluctant to leave. A nervous energy filled the room, a tension that seemed to pulse between us. My heart pounded as I tightened the robe around me, the fabric suddenly feeling heavy. Samuel, I said softly, my voice barely audible. He stopped, turning back to face me, his expression unreadable. Yes? You don't have to go, I said, surprising myself with the words. I mean, if you want to stay and talk, that's fine. For a moment, he didn't. His eyes met mine, steady and searching, as if trying to decipher the meaning behind my words. Slowly, he stepped further into the room, letting the door click shut behind him. The sound sent a shiver down my spine, though I wasn't sure if it was fear or something else entirely. Are you sure? He asked, his voice low and cautious. I don't want to make you uncomfortable. I'm not uncomfortable, I replied quickly, though my cheeks flushed at the lie. I was anything but comfortable. My pulse was racing, my hands trembled slightly, and my thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion and longing. But I didn't want him to leave. Not yet. He hesitated before crossing the room, his movements slow and deliberate, as though testing the waters. He stopped a few feet from me, his gaze flicking to the robe still clutched around me before returning to my face. You seem different lately, he said softly. Quieter. I let out a nervous laugh, my fingers fidgeting with the edge of the robe. Life has a way of doing that to you, I replied. It's nothing serious. Just loneliness, I guess. His brows furrowed, a flicker of concern crossing his features. Loneliness, he echoed. But you're married. Marissa's always busy, I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. Always working. Always somewhere else. The bitterness in my tone surprised even me, and I quickly looked away, embarrassed by my own outburst. I'm sorry, I murmured. That's not fair to you. You don't have to apologize, he said quickly, his voice firm but kind. You deserve to feel seen, Daniel. You deserve to feel important. The sincerity in his words took my breath away. I glanced up at him, my chest tightening as I met his gaze. There was something in his eyes, something raw and unguarded, that made it impossible to look away. I don't know if I even remember what that feels like, I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. The confession hung in the air between us, vulnerable and heavy. But I didn't regret saying it. It was the truth, and for once, I didn't want to hide it. You are important, he said softly, taking another step closer. I see you. And I don't think you realize how much you matter. My breath caught in my throat as his words sank in. The warmth in his voice, the intensity in his eyes, it was overwhelming. I felt my defenses begin to crumble, the walls I'd built around myself slowly falling away. Thank you, I said, my voice trembling. You don't know how much that means to me. He reached out. Then, his hand brushing lightly against mine. The contact was brief, barely more than a touch, but it sent a jolt through me that I couldn't ignore. I looked down at our hands, his fingers hovering just inches from mine, and felt a surge of something I couldn't quite name. Daniel, he said softly, his voice laced with hesitation. I don't want to overstep, but I care about you. A lot. The room seemed to shrink around us, the air growing heavy with unspoken words and emotions. My heart pounded in my chest, my pulse racing as I tried to process what he was saying. "Samuel," I began, but my voice faltered. I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to respond to the storm of emotions swirling inside me. "I mean it," he continued, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "You've always been so kind to me. So understanding. And I know this is complicated, but I can't pretend I don't feel this way." I stared at him, my mind racing. His words were like a lifeline, pulling me out of the depths of my own loneliness and self-doubt. But they were also dangerous, tempting me to cross a line I wasn't sure I could ever come back from. "I don't know what to say," I admitted finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "This is complicated," he finished for me, a small, wry smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I know. But it doesn't make it any less real." He took another step closer, and I felt my breath hitch as the distance between us dwindled to almost nothing. His hand reached out again, this time resting gently on my shoulder. The warmth of his touch seeped through the fabric of the robe, sending a shiver down my spine. "You don't have to feel alone," he said softly, his gaze unwavering. "Not with me." I swallowed hard, my throat dry as his words echoed in my mind. "Samuel," I began, but before I could say anything more, his fingers brushed against my cheek, tilting my face up to meet his. The touch was tender, almost hesitant, as though he were waiting for me to pull away. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I found myself leaning into him, my heart pounding in my chest as his gaze locked with mine. "Tell me to stop," he murmured, his voice low and filled with a quiet intensity. "If you want me to, just say the word." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. The tension between us was unbearable, a magnetic pull that I couldn't resist. Slowly, he leaned in, his breath warm against my skin, and I felt my resolve crumble completely. When his lips finally met mine, it was soft at first, a tentative, almost questioning kiss. But as I responded, as I let myself sink into the moment, it deepened. The hesitation melted away. His hands moved to my waist, pulling me closer, and I felt the robe slip slightly from my shoulders. Every nerve in my body was alive, every touch sending a jolt of electricity coursing through me. The kiss grew more urgent, more desperate, and I felt myself losing control, giving in to the passion that had been simmering beneath the surface for far too long. This wasn't just a kiss. It was an escape. A release. A way to feel alive again. And as his hands roamed my back, as his lips moved with mine, I knew there was no turning back. But the craziest part was, this was only the beginning. His hands found the edge of the robe as it hung loosely over my shoulders, his fingers brushing against the soft fabric before trailing down to the curve of my waist. I shivered at his touch, feeling the heat of his palms through the thin material. Every inch of me seemed to burn with anticipation, with a longing I hadn't felt in years. "Daniel," he murmured against my lips, his voice thick with emotion. It wasn't just desire. It was something deeper, something that left me breathless and trembling. I pulled back slightly, my chest heaving as I tried to steady myself. His eyes locked onto mine, searching, pleading, as if asking for permission to continue. The weight of the moment was overwhelming, and yet I couldn't bring myself to step away. The world outside this room felt distant and unimportant. All I could focus on was him. His touch. His warmth. The way his gaze made me feel like I was the only person in the world. "I shouldn't," I whispered, my voice barely audible. But even as I said the words, I didn't move. My hands rested on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath my fingertips. It matched my own racing pulse, a rhythm that seemed to bind us together in a way I couldn't explain. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to," Samuel said softly, his tone filled with a quiet intensity that made my heart ache. I want you to know how much you mean to me. That's all." His words broke through the storm of thoughts swirling in my mind, and I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes. When was the last time someone had spoken to me like this? When was the last time I had felt seen, truly seen by someone? I don't know what I'm doing, I admitted, my voice trembling as I looked up at him. I don't know how to feel about any of this. You don't have to know, he replied, his hand brushing a strand of hair away from my face. We can figure it out together. One step at a time. The sincerity in his voice, the gentleness in his touch, it was all too much. I felt my defenses crumble completely, the walls I had built around myself shattering under the weight of his gaze. Slowly, I leaned into him, letting my forehead rest against his as I closed my eyes. I'm scared, I whispered, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Me too, he admitted, his breath warm against my skin. But I don't want to let fear stop us from this. This. The word hung in the air between us. I didn't know what it meant, what it would lead to, but I couldn't deny the pull I felt toward him. It was like gravity, an unstoppable force drawing us closer together. When he kissed me again, it was slower this time, more deliberate. His hands moved to my shoulders, gently sliding the robe down my arms until it pooled at my feet. I gasped softly, the cool air of the room contrasting with the heat of his touch. His lips never left mine as he guided me backward, and before I knew it, I was sitting on the edge of the bed, my heart pounding in my chest. He knelt in front of me, his hands resting lightly on my knees as his eyes searched mine. Are you sure? He asked, his voice steady but filled with a quiet vulnerability that made my chest tighten. I hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Yes, I said, the word coming out as barely more than a whisper. I'm sure. The tension between us thickened as he leaned in. My hands found their way to his hair, tangling in the soft strands as I tilted my head back, letting myself get lost in the moment. Every touch, every kiss sent shivers down my spine, igniting a fire within me that I couldn't ignore. Samuel, I murmured, his name escaping my lips like a prayer. He responded with a low hum, the sensation electrifying, a mix of tenderness and urgency that left me breathless. I felt myself relax under his touch, the tension in my body melting away as I surrendered completely to the moment. There was no room for doubt or fear, only the overwhelming need to feel, to connect, to let go of everything that had held me back for so long. You're incredible, he murmured, his voice low and filled with awe. The sincerity in his tone sent a rush of warmth through me, and I felt tears sting my eyes once again. How had I gone so long without hearing words like that? Without feeling like this? You make me feel alive, I confessed, my voice trembling with emotion. I don't even know how to explain it. You don't have to, he replied, his hands cupping my face as he kissed me deeply. I feel it too. Time seemed to stand still as we lost ourselves in each other, the outside world fading into insignificance. Every touch, every kiss, every whispered word felt like a revelation, a reminder of what it meant to truly connect with someone. And as the moment stretched on, I realized that I didn't want it to end. I don't want to lose this, I said softly, my voice barely audible. I don't want to lose you. You won't, he promised, his gaze steady and filled with determination. I'm not going anywhere. His words were a balm to my soul, soothing the ache of loneliness that had plagued me for so long. I clung to him, letting his presence fill the empty spaces in my heart. And for the first time in years, I felt whole. And as the night wore on, the boundaries between us blurred, and I stopped caring about what was right or wrong. All that mattered was the way he made me feel, the way he reminded me of who I was, of what it meant to be alive. And in that moment, I knew there was no turning back. You're shaking, he said softly, his thumb brushing along my jawline as his eyes met mine. I nodded, unable to speak. The truth was, I wasn't sure if I was trembling from nerves or anticipation. Maybe it was both. Either way, I felt raw, exposed in a way I hadn't allowed myself to be in years. It's okay, he whispered, his voice so gentle it made my chest ache. We can take our time. I'm not going anywhere. Something in his words, in the sincerity of his tone, settled the whirlwind of emotions that had been swirling inside me. I exhaled shakily, leaning into his touch as I let myself believe him. Let myself trust him. It was terrifying, but also exhilarating, to let go of the walls I had spent so long building around my heart. I've spent so much time feeling invisible, I admitted, my voice barely audible. Like I was just existing. But with you, I feel seen. You are seen, he replied, his hands steady as they held me. And you deserve so much more than just existing. The weight of his words hit me hard, and I felt tears welling up in my eyes. I blinked rapidly, trying to keep them at bay, but one escaped, slipping down my cheek before I could brush it away. Samuel leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to the tears' path. The tenderness of the gesture made my breath catch, and I felt my resolve crumble completely. I don't know how to do this, I said, my voice trembling. But I don't want to stop. We don't have to figure everything out right now, he said, his forehead resting against mine. Let's just be here. Together. His words were grounding, anchoring me to the present moment in a way I hadn't felt in years. Slowly, I leaned in, letting my lips brush against his in a kiss that was both hesitant and desperate. It was as if I was afraid the moment would disappear if I didn't hold on to it tightly enough. Samuel responded immediately, his hands moving to my waist as he pulled me closer. The kiss deepened, and I felt the weight of my worries start to melt away. His touch was confident but careful, his movements deliberate, as though he was afraid of breaking me. It was intoxicating, the way he seemed to put all of his focus on me, on making me feel wanted. As his hands moved along my sides, tracing the curve of my body, I felt a warmth spread through me that I hadn't experienced in what felt like an eternity. It wasn't just physical. It was emotional. It was the feeling of being desired, of being cared for in a way that went beyond words. You're beautiful, he murmured, his voice low and filled with reverence. I've always thought so. His confession sent a shiver down my spine, and I pulled back slightly to look at him. The intensity in his gaze was almost too much to bear, but I couldn't look away. There was no hesitation in his expression, no doubt. He meant every word. Samuel, I started, but the words caught in my throat. What could I say? That I was terrified? That I had spent so long feeling unworthy of this kind of attention that I didn't know how to accept it now that it was in front of me? You don't have to say anything, he said gently, his hands moving to cup my face. I just want you to know how I feel. That's all. The honesty in his voice made my chest ache, and I felt myself leaning into his touch again. Slowly, deliberately, I let my hand slide up his arms, feeling the strength in his muscles as I moved closer. He let out a soft breath as I pressed my forehead to his, my heart pounding against my ribs. I'm scared, I admitted again, the words trembling on my lips. But I don't want to stop. Then we won't, he said simply, his voice steady and sure. I'll take care of you, Daniel. I promise. The conviction in his words, the way he said my name with so much care, made my knees feel weak. I let him guide me backward, my body sinking into the softness of the bed as he hovered over me. His hands moved with a precision that was both comforting and thrilling, his touch igniting every nerve ending as he explored. Eventually, a silence lingered. I don't think you even realize how amazing you are, he said, breaking the silence. His words sent a rush of emotion through me, and I felt tears prick my eyes once again. I've spent so long feeling forgotten, I confessed, my voice breaking. But you make me feel like I matter. You do matter, he said firmly, his hands stilling as he looked into my eyes. More than you know. The sincerity in his gaze, the way his voice carried so much emotion, left me breathless. I reached up, cupping his face in my hands as I let myself believe him. In that moment, it didn't matter what was right or wrong. All that mattered was the connection we shared, the way he made me feel like I was worth something again. I don't know what's going to happen next, I said softly, my voice barely audible. But I don't want this to end. It doesn't have to, he replied, his hand gently stroking my hair. We'll figure it out together. I closed my eyes, letting his words wash over me. For the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, I could find happiness again. And as I lay there in his arms, I realized that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I wasn't alone anymore. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was comforting, a blanket that wrapped around us as we lay tangled together. Samuel's hand rested lightly on my back, tracing slow, soothing circles that sent a ripple of calm through me. My head lay on his chest, the steady rise and fall of his breathing grounding me in the reality of what had just happened. For a long while, neither of us spoke. Words felt unnecessary, almost intrusive, in the quiet intimacy that had settled between us. I closed my eyes, listening to the rhythm of his heartbeat beneath my ear, letting it anchor me to this moment. The world outside the room ceased to exist. There was only him. His warmth. His presence. The way his touch made me feel whole again. I don't want this to end, I murmured, my voice barely above a whisper. Samuel's hand stilled for a moment, and then he tightened his arm around me, holding me closer. It doesn't have to, he said softly. Not if we don't want it to. His words were reassuring, but they couldn't quiet the questions swirling in my mind. What would this mean for us? For the delicate balance of our lives? For my marriage? I hadn't allowed myself to think about Marissa during the heat of the moment, but now her presence loomed like a shadow in the back of my mind, a reminder of the choices I'd made and the boundaries I'd crossed. I'm scared, I admitted, my voice trembling. I don't know how to go back to normal after this. Samuel shifted slightly, propping himself up on one elbow so he could look down at me. His gaze was steady, filled with a tenderness that made my chest ache. You don't have to be scared, he said, brushing a strand of hair away from my face. We'll figure it out. Together. But how? I asked, my voice cracking under the weight of my uncertainty. How can we go on like this without? We don't have to have all the answers right now, he interrupted gently. Let's just take it one step at a time. His calmness was disarming, and I found myself nodding despite the chaos in my mind. There was something about the way he looked at me, the way he held me, that made me believe we could find a way forward, even if I couldn't see the path yet. I don't deserve you, I said, my voice barely audible. You deserve so much more than you think, he replied, his thumb brushing lightly against my cheek. And I'm not going anywhere, Daniel. Not unless you want me to. His words sent a wave of relief through me, and I felt tears prick my eyes once again. I leaned forward, pressing a soft kiss to his lips, letting it convey all the emotions I couldn't put into words. He responded immediately, his hand sliding up to cradle the back of my head as he deepened the kiss. It wasn't hurried or desperate, it was slow, deliberate, filled with a quiet intensity that made my heart ache. When we finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against mine, his breath warm against my skin. We'll take it one day at a time, he said, his voice steady and sure. We'll figure it out. I nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope stir within me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel alone. I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen, wanted, and cared for. And that was something I wasn't willing to let go of. As the minutes passed, the room grew darker, the sunlight streaming through the curtains fading into the soft glow of twilight. The stillness was comforting, but the reality of our situation lingered in the back of my mind, refusing to be ignored. I knew we couldn't stay like this forever. Sooner or later, we would have to face the consequences of what we had done. I should go, Samuel said finally, his voice reluctant. I tensed at his words, my heart clenching at the thought of him leaving. You don't have to, I said quickly, my voice tinged with desperation. He hesitated, his gaze searching mine. I don't want to, he admitted. But I don't want to make this harder for you either. I reached for his hand, intertwining my fingers with his. Just stay a little longer, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, his expression softening as he lay back down beside me, pulling me into his arms once more. I rested my head on his chest, letting the steady rhythm of his heartbeat soothe my racing thoughts. For now, I wanted to hold on to this moment for as long as I could. The hours slipped by in a blur of quiet conversation and tender touches. We talked about everything and nothing, our words punctuated by moments of silence that felt just as meaningful. Samuel's presence was a balm to my fractured soul, and I found myself clinging to him like a lifeline. And as the night deepened, the reality of our situation began to sink in. I knew we couldn't keep this a secret forever. Sooner or later, Marissa would notice the changes in me, the shifts in our dynamic. And what would I say to her then? How could I explain what had happened without tearing our lives apart? I don't know how to do this, I confessed, my voice trembling. You don't have to figure it out alone, Samuel said, his hand stroking my hair. I'll be here. No matter what. His reassurance was comforting, but it couldn't erase the weight of the choices I had made. As much as I wanted to believe that we could find a way to navigate this, I knew the road ahead would be anything but easy. Promise me something, I said, looking up at him. Anything, he replied without hesitation. Promise me you won't regret this, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Promise me you won't hate me for what we've done. He cupped my face in his hands, his gaze unwavering. I could never hate you, he said firmly. And I don't regret a single moment. His words brought tears to my eyes, and I leaned into his touch, letting myself believe him. For now, I wanted to hold on to the hope that we could make this work, that we could find a way to be together without losing ourselves in the process. The night stretched on, and as we lay there in each other's arms, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time, I allowed myself to hope for a future, for happiness, for love. The aftermath of what transpired between Samuel and me was a quiet, internal earthquake. The morning after, the house felt different. The air was heavier, charged with a secret that only the two of us knew. Samuel left before dawn, his departure a silent agreement between us. A lingering look, a touch of his hand on my shoulder, was our only goodbye. I stood at the window, watching the empty street, and felt the first cold trickle of reality. The room still smelled like him, a ghost of a moment that already felt like a dream. When Marissa returned later, her cheerful, distant hum from the kitchen was a sound from another lifetime. I moved through the day like an actor in a play, saying my lines, smiling my smiles, all while my heart was somewhere else entirely. In the days that followed, Samuel and I became experts in silence. We spoke in glances, in the careful space we left between us in the hallway. The connection was still there, a live wire humming just beneath the surface, but we both knew we couldn't touch it. It was a constant, exquisite agony, to see the person who made you feel truly seen and have to pretend you were strangers. We both knew it was unsustainable. The guilt was a cold stone in my stomach, a constant companion. One evening, I found him in the living room, staring out the same window I had. We can't do this, I said softly, the words tasting like ash. It wasn't a question. It was the truth we'd both been avoiding. He didn't turn around, but his shoulders slumped in resignation. I know, he whispered. It's not fair. To anyone. There was no dramatic fight, no tearful goodbye. Our ending was as quiet as our beginning. It was a mutual, painful understanding that the world we lived in had no room for the world we had created. He threw himself into finding his own place, and I let him go piece by piece. Letting go felt like learning to breathe underwater. I missed him with a physical ache. I missed the way he looked at me, not as Marissa's husband, but just as Daniel. But the choice was made. Life settled back into its old rhythms. The empty walls felt emptier. The routine returned. But I was different. Samuel had held up a mirror and forced me to see myself, not as a ghost, but as a man who was lonely, who was worthy of being seen, and who had chosen to stay in the shadows. He moved out a month later. The goodbye was polite, respectful, and it shattered me. Marissa commented on how quiet the house felt again. I just nodded. The aftermath wasn't about him. It was about me. He was the catalyst, but the change had to be mine. I couldn't unsee what I'd seen. I couldn't unfeel what I'd felt. The longing didn't disappear, it just redirected itself inward. The question was no longer what about us, but what about me? I had to choose, would I go back to sleepwalking through my life, or would I finally wake up? So, I'm left here, in the quiet. Still. Trying to understand it all. Was it wrong? I don't know. It was complicated. It was human. It was a moment of terrible, beautiful weakness that showed me my own strength. I shared this story because I had to. I had to put it out into the world to make it real. Now, I need to know, what do you think?